The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Immediately after feeding the crowd with the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go ahead to the other side while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up to the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone, but by this time the boat, battered by the waves, was far from the land, for the wind was against them. And early in the morning, Jesus came walking toward them on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified, saying, "It is a ghost." And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." Jesus said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat, started walking on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he noticed the strong wind, he became frightened, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught him, saying to him, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" When they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." The Gospel of the Lord. Throughout a lot of my time in formation for the priesthood, there were many different people, whether it was my novice director or seminary professors, other Basilians that I lived with, that would speak about the first reading that we heard today from 1 Kings and use it to show the importance of taking time for prayer, the importance of looking for that silent place where we can hear the voice of God speak. And it is true, it is important that we need to spend that time in prayer. But I think that this passage can sometimes give us a little bit of a false impression or false interpretation of what that time in prayer might look like. Because it might lead us to believe that all of these things that cause noise, that might keep us from hearing the voice of God, are going to happen in succession. There's going to be fire, there's going to be wind, there's going to be earthquake, and then there's going to come a point when all of that stops and we'll be able to clearly hear the voice of God. And I don't know about those of you that are here or those of you joining us online for this Mass, but I think I could probably count on one hand the number of times where I've had that absolute silence that I've been able to clearly hear the voice of God. I think far more often our prayer time might be more akin to what Peter experiences in the gospel reading that we hear today. Because there's times that we can try to put aside all of the outside distractions. We can turn off the TV, we can turn off the computer, we can turn off the cell phone, and we still find that there is noise coming from within our own head. Whether it's our fears, our anxieties, our insecurities, intrusive thoughts, there's all of that going on. So the image of the disciples in the boat might give us a much clearer picture of what our prayer life looks like. And so the challenge then is that it's not about finding that place of absolute silence. It's not about finding that place where God's voice is going to ring out clearly for us to hear. The question and the challenge that this gospel passage calls us to ask is, how is it that we can listen for God's voice in the midst of everything else that is going on, in the midst of the noise of the storms, in the midst of our own thoughts, our own fears. How is it that we listen for God's voice cutting through all of that and calling to us, saying, "Take courage, it is I, be not afraid"? How do we, like Peter, say, "Lord, call me to come to you"? And then when Jesus calls us and says, "Come," how do we respond? There's a lesson in Peter's response as well. Because Peter, when he first hears that voice, gets out of the boat, and he is able to do great things. He is able to walk on water. But it's only when he begins to notice the noise and the storm and everything going on around him, and he focuses more on that than he does on Jesus in front of him who is calling to him, that's when the fear takes over again. And that's when Peter is no longer able to walk on water, because he loses his focus on Christ, and he is no longer able to see Christ for the storm around us. That's the lesson for us, brothers and sisters. No matter what the storms we are facing, be they our own personal insecurities, be they the unrest that is present in the world, be they the uncertainties because of the pandemic that we are currently living through, we are called to keep our focus fixed on Christ and to allow him to lead us and to guide us through all of the storms and through all of the uncertainties in our lives. So as we continue this Eucharist this morning, perhaps we can make our prayer, "Lord, increase my faith and remove my doubt so that I may follow you faithfully, and I may not be distracted and discouraged and brought to fear by the storms of this life, but I may always seek to hear your voice calling out in the midst of all of the trials and storms of this life, calling me to come to you and to grow in holiness and faith and love." Amen.